to Truthwave Media. Today we have a very honored guest, Mr. Sergio with us, and to help us understand the situation in Afghanistan. Mr. Sergio, a retired Army colonel, and he is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Trump administration. Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Okay, everybody is watching for the situation in Afghanistan. So how do you feel?
I think the key lesson that we have to take from what we've just experienced in the last week is that we are less safe than we used to be. And we're less safe because of the way that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was conducted by Mr. Joe Biden.
How would they make this kind of decision to retreat and drop everything just all of a sudden?
It's called a lack of planning, a lack of understanding of international dynamics. It's a certain level of hubris on the part of the president, and it is an absolute disaster in the way that this was conducted. The U.S. Army doesn't do anything without the orders of the President of the United States. And it's not just the Army, because in Afghanistan, we had a joint force. So we had Air Force, we had Navy, we had Marines, we had Army, we had everybody. But the Army only acts upon the commands of the Commander-in-Chief. The Commander-in-Chief is ultimately responsible for what the U.S. does or fails to do. That's what it means for the buck to stop there, not to point fingers at everybody, but to assume and accept the responsibility for his own actions.
People are all shocked when they see that the government over there does not even defend. They just flee.
That's because the bad guys have a lot of guns, they're organized, and they have an understanding of the Afghan culture, and they are Afghans. So when you say, I'm ready to leave, the Afghans say, okay, we're ready to take over. How hard is that to understand? It's pretty. One of the things that President Biden did horrendously was he said, we're going to pull out by September 11th. September 11th has a lot of significance for those people in Islam. September 11th is when the Ottoman Turks lost against the Austrians in 1683. That was September 11th is a very key date. And so when he says we're leaving on September 11th, it's basically confirming that now the success is on the side of those that are against the United States. Also, in 1429, when Malta was invaded by Muslims, also the Ottoman Turks, not necessarily just Muslims, but they were representing Islam, and the Maltese defenders were representing Christianity. That was another battle that ended around September 11th. So when we try to understand why it is that we were attacked on September 11th, let's look at history. There's a significance to dates. And when you tie that date to a withdrawal, that is a horrible, horrible idea. It was the United States that was providing much of the support that they needed to be able to fight. The Afghan army fought when it had the U.S. support. You got to remember that there's the high level of corruption that's always existed in Afghanistan. That was one of the reasons that President Trump was saying we need to pull out, because it's really up to the Afghans now to take charge. But you do it in an orderly way, and you do it in a way where they're able to stand up on their own 2 feet. We saw a total collapse over a period of less than a week. And so when you pull out indiscriminately, as this administration did, you're going to have these type of results. So one of the things that President Biden was very quick to point out was that he had to live up to President Trump's agreements, which is not true. He didn't have to live up to them, because that's the only agreement that he lived up to. Because if you look at what he did with a pipeline, what he did with the southern border, what he did with just about any other policy that the Trump administration was, that he threw them all out. So you had President Biden come in and just basically change everything. The one thing that he didn't change was the Afghan policy. And after he blamed the Afghans, after he blamed President Trump, after he blamed the allies, after he blamed everybody, says the buck stops here. That's not the way it works. You take responsibility for those things that you took over. And you can't say that it was President Trump because he's been in office now for over 7 months. So this is what we're facing. And this is one of these challenges that we're going to see into the future that's going to have second and third order effects that are going to be terrible.
So how is the situation now? I think a lot of people are concerned about the American citizens, 15,000. If they are somehow held as hostage, how should the government respond? What can we do?
Well, this is part of the problem. What we've done in the way that we've conducted ourselves is we've lost deterrence. Deterrence is what a superpower has to ensure that those other countries that want to attack it or present a challenge to it don't do it because they know that the consequences will be severe. And so we've lost that ability of deterrence, and that's the problem. So we're going to have to regain that deterrence. How we confront an enemy that is determined to take over a country is going to be difficult. And I'm not sure that that our current government has thought their way through all of the ramifications, but there's going to be many of them. And this thing will not end on the 31st of August, as has been promised, other than just leaving Americans there or leaving our allies there.
Are there anything that we can do to fix the situation?
Absolutely. What we can do is send a message to the current administration that they will not be able to continue in political office. So what we need to do is, through elections, get enough people in Congress to get rid of this administration and put pressure on it to behave in a more responsible manner.
About the U.S. Afghanistan policy, do you think we should actually overturn the Taliban at first place?
Well, I think the way that President Trump was guiding the Afghan policy was to be able to withdraw in a more orderly manner and turn Afghanistan over to the Afghans, but doing it in a way that they would be able to maintain their political power. When you just completely withdraw without any planning and any coordination, this is what you get. And the challenge that we're going to face is that, coupled with our open borders in the southern part of the United States, we don't know who's coming into the United States. So we now could have potential terrorist cells already here because nobody's been checking. So when you couple with that with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we don't know who's getting on those planes. We don't know if some of those people have been infiltrated. We don't do any background checks. We just get them on the plane and get them out. And so we could potentially have a terrorist cell here in the United States. So we've got to remind the Biden administration that he is responsible for this and he will be held accountable if there's ever an attack in the United States. This has been one of the most disgraceful withdrawals from a conflict that we've had in our history.
Well, on the hindsight, should the U.S. occupy Afghanistan to start with?
Well, hindsight is always interesting. We went into Afghanistan to punish those that attacked us on 9/11. It should have stopped there. But we can sit there and analyze why we didn't. But at the end of the day, once we started trying to create something that was not going to work historically, we were going down the wrong path.
About the refugees, what do you think is the good solution?
On the refugee issue, we need to ensure that those people that are coming to the United States have been vetted properly. Now, right now, because of the commotion and because of the way that we withdrew, it's going to be very difficult to do that. But I would argue that there's third countries where they can be staged from, and you can bring people in. And as they are able to be properly vetted, then you can allow them to come into the United States. And that's going to be a decision that's going to be made politically.
Yeah, I heard that Maryland and Virginia are actually starting to take those refugees. Indeed.
And so right now, the way that our southern border is open, there is no controls on who's coming, and we're just allowing people to come in opposition to U.S. laws. So right now, we don't have an orderly process to be able to absorb more people. But just if you look at who's coming in from the southern border, we're going to absorb about 2 million people in this year alone without having proper documentation. So this is going to be one of those challenges that will remain with us. But let me just add one more thing on the Afghanistan issue. because we withdrew in the way that we did, the Taliban now has all of those weapons and equipment that we left behind. So they have vehicles, they have ammunition, they have weapons, and many of those vehicles and equipment that we had there is of high technology. So what the Taliban is doing is they're taking this equipment and shipping it to our enemies so they can reverse engineer what our equipment is capable of doing. So that's just yet another loss that we've had in the way that we've conducted ourselves. It's now Afghanistan that is the central point for Islamist terrorists that can gather, and they can use this as a propaganda tool to show the world that they defeated the United States, or at least that's the way they're going to portray it. So now we can expect that like-minded terrorists are going to congregate in Afghanistan, and now they have a base that is part of a nation state. So that's going to present yet another major challenge to the United States.
So do you think they would do research on their own, or they would ship it to other bigger countries?
My guess is that the technological capabilities of the Taliban is not that great, but Russia's is. And what the Taliban want is money. So if they can sell that technology or that equipment to a party that wants to dismantle it and reverse engineer it, they're going to pay for it. And so that's going to give the Chinese an opportunity to see what our equipment is capable of doing, or the Russians or any other enemy of the United States. So that's not a good position to be in.
Well, so for the audience who care about this issue, are there anything besides praying that we can do for Afghanistan people and American citizens there?
Yes, we can put pressure on our political leaders. So we get on the phone and we tell them, this is what you need to do. And it should be a bipartisan thing. We need to put pressure on our political leaders to make sure that they understand that they're leaving behind someone that we promised to support. And now we haven't done that. So we need to make the appropriate changes to ensure that these people are properly taken care of. But most importantly is we need to make sure that we stand by American citizens that are still left in Afghanistan. The fact that we have now a president who appears to be speaking out of both sides of his mouth on how he's going to support the withdrawal of Americans is very concerning, because on the one hand, he says he's leaving on the 31st of August. On the other hand, he's saying, no, we'll stay around to help Americans get out of Afghanistan. And then and yet again, he'll say that he doesn't know exactly where all the Americans are. Now, there is a certain level of uncertainty in that, but there should be a fairly accurate assessment of exactly how many Americans there are in Afghanistan. Many of these Americans register with the U.S. Embassy. Let's say we have this many Americans registered with the U.S. Embassy, and that's how you start making your numbers.
Yeah, it is true a disaster right now. What would you think is the number one priority if you were the government leader to do right now?
Right now is get Americans out of Afghanistan and make sure that we send a clear message to America's enemies that we're still the most powerful country in the world. And if you challenge us, there will be consequences. But you lose credibility when you just bail on your own friends, because our credibility is taking a hit. And it's the result of this administration. It's a result of the president, who is in charge ultimately of how U.S. policy is executed.
Do you think the Taliban power would work with American government?
Yes, they're going to have to. Now, how they work with the U.S. government is a different story. Obviously, they're negotiating from a position of strength because they're now in charge. Now, the Taliban, if it wants to be a nation state, has to now consider what its role will be in the world. And Afghanistan has always been one of these countries that has been governed by local councils and many local strongmen. So they're going to have their own challenges in keeping the country together. Afghanistan as a nation state is only a new concept. So they're going to have their hands full, and they're going to have to get assistance from the world if they want to create this nation state, and international pressure can be put upon them and should be put upon them for them to act responsibly. How much they're going to listen to the United States or the world community remains to be seen. I mean, we have countries like Korea that basically just do whatever they want. Now, they do get some influence from China, or places like Cuba that does what it wants to do. They have their own sets of friends and supporters. So it's going to be a matter of the world community putting economic pressure, diplomatic pressure, to behave in a manner conducive to a nation state. Obviously, the world community is trying to catch its breath because it was caught flat-footed. You know, the NATO allies were surprised at the way that we pulled out because we didn't inform them exactly of what our timeline was. It was just something that was done arbitrarily. The negotiations with the Taliban, the Afghan government was left out of the discussions. There's all sorts of things that should have been done in a different way. That's water under the bridge. We have to deal with it here and now. We have to now come together as a community, given all the damage that's been done diplomatically. That needs to be repaired, and we need to move forward and figure out a way that is consolidated and is coordinated in a way that you can put pressure on the Taliban government to conduct itself in an appropriate manner.
Going forward, should U.S. occupy a country like that, or to help a power like that?
There's so many factors that go into making those types of decisions that it's very difficult to say yes, no. There's reasons why we went into Afghanistan. One would argue that we should have gone in, found the perpetrators, brought them to justice, and then left. That's it. I mean, we've done that before. We did that in Panama. We did that in Grenada. We've done that in other places that we've invaded, where we go in, we take care of business and leave. And that's the way this should have been conducted. If you look at Afghanistan, it's got a history of major powers going into Afghanistan and having to leave because they can't control it. It's like controlling water with your hands. Eventually it's going to evaporate, or it's going to just go through your fingers. For example, you had Alexander the Great. He went into Afghanistan, did not succeed. You had Genghis Khan, horrible, nasty Genghis Khan, who conquered Asia and all the way into Europe, and yet he couldn't control. He could not have the same level of impact on Afghanistan. You had the British that tried it several times. That didn't work. You had the Russians that tried it back in the 19th century and again in the 20th century. That didn't work. And then we go in there and we didn't learn the lessons from the previous empires that went into Afghanistan. The thing to do with Afghanistan is you go in and you go out. They're very divided. There's different groups, there's different tribes, there's different languages, there's different cultures, and there's different geography. And when you get into those mountainous areas, you're not going to control anything. And so people should have known that. And to think that you're going to create a modern nation state out of a country where its people are illiterate, very poor, uneducated, it's not that they're not ignorant, they're just not educated. And they don't have any money. And the way that the country is run is whoever can get money is the guy that controls those that don't have money. So there's a lot of dynamics that should have been taken into account. I never thought it was a good idea to stay there. I thought that we go in, we punish those that caused us damage on 9/11, we bring them to justice, or in the case of the military, when people attack us, we attack them, and then leave. There's no reason for us to hang around. What vital interest do we have in Afghanistan? Creating a nation state out of people that are culturally not attuned? Not a good idea.
So why would they support the Taliban power, the people? I mean,
if you have the guns and you have the control, people's fall in line. You know, if look at what happens when you take away people's guns. Look at how a small group is able to control a large group. It all has to do with power. It all has to do with force. And we keep thinking in terms of America. We don't understand that these people don't care. They're going to be in power and they're going to use the force of weapons to ensure compliance. It's that simple.
Great. Thank you so much. I know you are actually in a Army college, right?
I'm at the Army War College conducting an exercise.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Well, let me clarify that. I am part of an exercise being conducted at the Army Corps College.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.